So what is a monolith really? And a monolith is generally a web application architecture that combines the back end, front end, and middle tier layers in one deployment. And that not just those layers, but also all the applications. So a lot of times you think of CMS, e-commerce, personalization, search, market automation, CRM, like it can be a whole bunch of different things. It's generally a more traditional, we say here older school architecture that's still commonly used. And I guess, there's still lots of monolith solutions that aren't old school. They're here now, but generally more new solutions that come out are more composable. So a lot of the monolith solutions have been
Yeah,
around a
and I
long
think
time.
the industry
Right?
category that kind of encapsulated this was DXPs. I think
Yes,
traditional CMS kind of like merged into the DXP monolith. That's why this is such a prevalent term now, because people are kind of shifting away, I think.
for sure, for sure. And then you added in a couple points here that maybe you want to just talk about quickly around some aspects and characteristics
Yeah,
of
I
these
mean, I'm
solutions.
I'm I'm not a fan of monoliths, in case you hadn't noticed. Really think that people should move off them, and one of the main reasons is I think they're really difficult to scale. As you get a lot of sort of pieces in code that are all part of the same application, you need sort of big resources and infrastructure to make that sort of serve a lot of people or do scalable things. So that's a hard thing to manage, and it can be really expensive.
Right, right. I think they're obviously normally one deployment too, right? So one large deployment, which makes it very difficult to scale that across, clouds and infrastructures and look at one area, say, you know what, I need my CRM scaled up because I have 1,000
Yeah,
sales reps in there, but I don't need my website scaled up, or vice versa, type of thing. And those are normally
Yeah,
tied
I
together.
was actually just digging into that scaling, so you already moved on to it. But it's like if I wanted to scale that across, into like a load balancer, now I have to deploy that massive application into multiple places. And if I want to do region-based scaling, I got to deploy to multiple regions, and that's just a big thing to kind of maintain. And this sort of goes hand in hand with this
Hmm.
point, John, where it's like it makes it really tough to update those, especially if I've scaled it out already. So just doing the DevOps for that deployment, if I want to change one little piece of code, I have to deploy that entire monolithic app again, which means anything could go wrong, and I just took down my whole system, which is 0% fun.
Yeah, I guess if you want to update one of the components of the monolithic, like the CRM, the market automation, we need this update. We really need this because it has some new features or it has whatever. You're touching the whole system, right? So that makes it tough on the updates because you may break something on the other side, or it's just a larger upgrade. In general, you might get upgrades for other areas that you didn't want necessarily at this
Yeah,
point
and
in
I
time.
think, if you look at the entire sort of DevOps sort of like job role and that whole sort of body of work that goes into doing DevOps well, you look at these two things. DevOps came out of sort of handling these problems. It's hard to scale. It's hard to deploy these big apps, and
Right.
there's people that are, sometimes if you have a monolithic app, you often have people dedicated roles, full-time DevOps, so maybe a whole team that is just about keeping that thing up while through the deployments and all that sort of stuff. It can be really, really hard.
Right, right. And then debugging, if there's a problem somewhere, just a little problem, large problem, whichever one, it gets
And
tricky.
I think a part of this too is like, imagine, so I just purchased a DXP, this, some solution that we're working on, or that's the sort of, I've inherited this. Now I find a bug. Well, is that bug in the default implementation code? So is it a bug in like the version of this DXP that I bought? Is it a bug in the implementation code for like, the website code for some template that I've put on? Finding out where that bug is really, really hard. And then of course, now I have to fix the bug, deploy it, and see if it scales. So all of this kind of stuff daisy chains on top of each other for in terms of difficulties. I really don't like monoliths, in case you hadn't noticed.
And what about the innovation side? You mentioned here that it's harder to innovate on, and kind of move quickly on. So talk about that one a
So
little
in
bit.
order to solve the scaling and the update problems and the debugging problems, what happens is organizations put these limits upon, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to deploy this day. We need 2 weeks or sometimes 60 days to do a change because we have to go through all of these testing and everything. And developers just stop trying. I know that in my experience, that's what's happened is developers are like, there's so many gates, sort of gatekeepers to sort of stop the bad code from going out, that it makes it difficult to sort of
Hmm.
build new stuff. And I think a lot of the industry work that's being done now is acknowledging the fact that there's these big monoliths out there that are really hard to change. And so people are kind of, and we'll talk about this later, but kind of breaking off chunks of that to do some innovation where they need to, especially with regard to scale. So there's like, oh, we need this to not go down on Black Friday. So we need to pull the e-commerce section out of this, big application and do it differently. And there's a bunch of different sort of ways to do that in a sort of, hey, let's start adopting a composable stack or whatever. But this innovation piece is something that I think is a really big sort of issue. And we didn't even talk about security too much in here, because I think security is a thing that's important no matter what. But I think that's another sort of gatekeeper type function that stops the innovation, is worrying about security changes so you don't innovate.
Right, right. I know, just as a bit of a case study discussion here, we work with some pretty large enterprise companies, and some of them have, and I'm thinking of one in particular, has, huge monolithic DXP globally distributed. And Agility came in to do a small component of a project that they just needed to roll out very quickly. It was like a contest kind of campaign, and it worked really successfully. Kind of came in, they were able to build it up really quick, kind of roll that campaign out, and then a few divisions wanted to start using Agility in that organization, and it's kind of scaled out a little bit in terms of all these groups globally throughout the world kind of using Agility now. And the top level executives or the larger technical team has been like, oh, we want to standardize on our DXP. We put all this money into the solution.
Yep.
We want to push it out across all those other sites and kind of push Agility out was the kind of the messaging. And there was such a pushback from those smaller teams because they could innovate and they could be creative and they can move things out so quickly that now they're actually looking at the opposite direction. Okay, how do we bring Agility or these composable solutions into our larger network, even though we've made such a huge investment long term? It's just they're not able to be innovative enough and flexible, and that's not driven from the developers, which you kind of highlighted here. I wanted to just say the marketers, the business, team needs to get things out. They need to innovate. They need to, move faster and faster, especially with COVID and everything that just came so quickly. And now those teams are getting a lot more say in terms of architecturally how those things should be deployed. So that's a live case study that I've been seeing happen over the last 10 years with this customer, and just the movement of where they're focusing their time.
Yeah, I think the like headless CMS and like Jamstack and modern development frameworks have been the sort of the hammer that's chipping away at these monolithic type things. And it's kind of the gateway drug for, I want more of that. I want more of that, innovation and scalability and things like that you get from like a headless CMS.